Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Thank you for joining us. I am about to welcome Keith Mabry, the French regional buyer for KNL, and we're going to talk about Cab Franc. Cab Franc is an awesome grape, and I really think its spiritual home is in the Loire, so that's where we're going to focus on today. A little fact, Cab Franc happens to be the parent of Cabernet Sauvignon. Cab Franc and Sauvignon Blanc had a baby. That's Cabernet Sauvignon. So we've got Keith joining in pretty soon. There he is.
Hey.
Hey. Let's see. I gotta move this lower. Hold on one sec.
One less book in the pile.
I'm short. There. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Everybody here okay? Can you hear all right? Okay, so what are we drinking today?
So we've got a lineup of 6 different producers, all from different regions in the Loire. The Loire is kind of the spiritual home of Cab Franc, so I think it really encapsulates, I think, the best qualities that you'll find in that grape variety. And a lot of it's very soil driven, some of it's climate driven. The Loire is a cool climate region. It's also the longest river in France. I think it's even the longest river in Europe. And it's an unfettered river, so from the mountains to the sea, it actually does not change course. It's not obstructed in any way, and it adds its own characteristics to the wines, which we're going to talk about when we get a little bit further down the lineup and the different soil compositions of each of the wines. So each one of these is a producer that we either direct import or that we use regularly that are sort of just core items. So we've got some of our favorites today. And I thought we would start in the westernmost part where they grow Cab Franc, and that's in the Anjou area. And so Anjou is, if you were going from the Atlantic upriver, you would start in Muscadet, and Muscadet is a primarily white growing region, and the grape there is Melon de Bourgogne. Mm-hmm. And they produce very crisp, kind of crunchy white wines that are really great with shellfish and the sort of seafood and lake fish there, or river fish there in the region. So you go a little bit further up and you're in Anjou, and you're still in the sort of maritime composition, like the weather patterns that come through there.
Are you north or south of the river?
So we're on the east side of the river, but the Anjou actually sort of straddles both sides of the river, but the primary part of Anjou is just the south. If you were in the northern part of Anjou, you would actually be in some of the subregions of, or like the area of Savennières, which is a sub-appellation, but it's actually its own standalone appellation, but it's part of the broader Anjou area. So Anjou is interesting because it's actually much different soil type than what we associate with most of the Loire Valley. In the Loire, we think of lots of limestone, lots of chalk, lots of clay soils in the region. And that starts in Sancerre, which is much further away. It's probably almost a 4-hour drive.
Straight east, right?
Pretty straight east. Yeah, there's a few hooks and valleys, and you got to go through some oddball areas to get there. There's no just one highway that takes you out to Sancerre. You kind of got to go through the main cities, and then you kind of cut down. So the Loire is not, the road structure that surrounds the Loire is just as winding and wild as the Loire itself. So in Anjou, though, you have primarily schist soils, which is that sort of stratification soil. It's actually kind of pressed, so it has different mineral content. And it's often what we associate with some volcanic activity. And when you're in Muscadet, it's very volcanic driven. There's a lot of granitic soil, gneiss, and some other soils like that. But and there's a lot of schist there as well. But Anjou is primarily schist driven, and most of the wines, the whites and the reds, are planted on some form of schist. There's some mixed volcanic soils as well that provide sort of warmer characteristics when they grow Cabernet Sauvignon. But the first producer that we worked with, we started in Anjou, is called Domaine du Petit Clocher. And
what does Cab Franc do on schist soil?
I'll say it again.
So what does Cab Franc do on the schist soil? How does it vary from the limestone?
It gives you a bit more warmth and generosity because it's not as basic a soil. you get kind of a more supple, sweet roundness, I think, to the wines. And so when you're talking about chalky limestone soils, you have a very high pH, and that generally tends to make wines with a little bit more acidity to them. And in Anjou, you have a little bit lower pH soil, and so you tend to get these a little bit more supple and elegant and kind of round Cab Francs. So if you're not that familiar with the grape variety, I think it's a great place to start, because you're going to get a warmer, richer kind of expression that you might think of something closer to like a California Cabernet Franc. Maybe not, and definitely not as expensive. This wine only comes in at $13.99, and so, and it's a 2018 vintage, and I think
it's definitely juicy fruit.
Yeah.
Maybe not the weight of a California Cab Franc. It's still light and fresh and easy.
Stylistically, you wouldn't see you'll find some pretty full-bodied Cab Franc, but in most cases, they tend to be a bit more medium full, kind of along the lines of what you would find. So I would think it as like Cabernet Franc is sort of the Pinot Noir, like stylistically. If Cab and Pinot Noir had a baby, you'd be a Cab Franc. Though Cab Franc is technically the parent grape variety to Cabernet Sauvignon, so that would be very weird, incestuous. So, anyways, what do you think of this, though? I think you're going to get more of the darker blackcurrant, maybe even some plummy notes to it. You definitely Cab Franc, you're always going to find slightly herbaceous notes, depending on the ripeness level. You can find, anything from sort of very green, leafy, almost vegetal characteristics. But in this warmer production style of this wine, I think you're going to find more of the sort of sagey, almost like notes of rosemary or thyme in these wines.
Yeah, and on top of a very juicy cranberry kind of palate, the sage notes on the nose are so nice. This is a Thanksgiving wine for sure. This would be great at the Thanksgiving table.
And I like these as winter reds. I like heavy reds during the winter, but I like medium-bodied reds that have a lot of flavor. And so I find that especially with heavy foods, you might want something actually a little bit lighter to offset the heft of the food that you're eating. Not everything needs to be big, bold red with big, bold food.
Yeah, I actually think Cab Franc is really good with vegetarian food. It's sometimes hard to pair a red with vegetarian food, but if you do, anything sort of on the heavier side, casseroles, etc., with vegetables, this would be great.
Yeah, and I mean, if you like, even with like Indian food, I think maybe something spicy, this is terrific. But you could even get into a little bit of spice. I always caution with high spice, because usually you want something with just a touch of sweetness to kind of counteract the heat. But a little bit of medium spice level, I think you're still in pretty good shape, because this has enough glycerin to kind of counteract, and enough acidity to kind of counteract some of those spicier characteristics. And the tannins are very fine, so you're not going to get that robust sort of tannic explosion when you have like really spicy food with high tannin wines.
Right. So can you show everybody the bottle again?
Yeah. So we picked up this producer a couple of years ago. We started working with them. We started with their white, which is a Chenin Blanc, their Anjou Blanc, which we actually also have in store right now. Fantastic. And great with the spicier food, because it does have just the roundest edge of sweetness on the finish, which I think makes Chenin Blanc like an almost even more ideal pairing with some more spicy and exotic flavored foods than even a lot of the Rieslings that are out there. Not that I pick a Riesling up that.
I think that the Loire in general is just a bounty of table wines. Everything there is great with food. It wants food. It's light, not overpowering, thirst quenching. So good.
So this is the Denis family. There's three cousins who work together. The one cousin is the winemaker, one cousin manages the vineyards, and one cousin runs the operation. And so we picked them up, about 2 years ago. And on my visit, they took me to the old village where their grandparents basically started the winery. And the Petit Clocher is the chapel, the steeple, which is the church right next door. But because they were growing and the church was so busy, they couldn't do their, it was getting more and more difficult to accept their grapes through the back door because people on Sunday would park their cars and they couldn't get their grapes up to the reception area to start offloading.
So it was an active chapel that's
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a quaint little village. You know, it's the original space. I think they still own the original space, but mostly now it's just kind of storage. And, you know, they have the original tanks that are built in. And this is a very straightforward style. This is done in tank, probably mostly stainless steel for fermentation, maybe concrete tank for resting. But it is no obtrusion of oak or intrusion of oak in this whatsoever.
Yeah, I don't get any oak. It's so fresh. It's just so lively.
So
that's a fun one.
Yeah, so the counterpoint to Anjou is Saumur, which is just to the east of it, and almost like in Anjou, almost envelops somewhere around the demarcated area, not all the way around, but kind of covers part of it. And a lot of it is because of the soil type. And so if you're this soil, and this is on what's called like sort of the edge of the Turonian Plateau. This is where the limestone in the Loire Valley basically comes to an end. And Anjou is where the volcanic and schist activity of all this upheaval that was brought up near where the plates were pulling apart. So that's where Muscadet and Anjou sort of form. And then you have this old Turonian limestone that was pushed up, and this is ancient seabed. So, and they call it, in this area, they call it tuffeau. And the Saumur is famous for the castles that were built and carved from the quarries where they extracted all of these limestone and made these blocks and built all these beautiful houses. And in the process, there's sort of a network of ant-like tunnels all throughout the region where they now cellar or produce a lot of the wines in the area. And even many people have moved into these tunnels. And you'll see this all up and down this part of the Loire, from Vouvray in the Tours area all the way to the west in Saumur. And they're called the troglodytes, the cave dwellers. So you'll actually, if you were taking a river cruise, you could see these like beautiful facades, you know, on the precipice of, or the edge of the slopes leading up to the river. And people have stacked all of built the sort of facades that lead into their tunnels, which are their homes. So it's such a fascinating.
It's so pretty. So yeah. Before we move on to some more completely, I've got a question about Anjou. Does Anjou typically not see oak, or does it depend on the producer?
Depends on the producer primarily, but at this level, there's very little oak used at this sort of price point. You'll see maybe some large format casks, maybe anywhere from like 500-liter barrels all the way up to the large, multi-hectoliter barrels.
But not barrique.
Yeah, but not as much barrique, unless you have an elite producer that's trying to create something that maybe has a little bit more longevity, is meant to age for an extended period of time. This is your cheap and cheerful kind of Tuesday night, I bought a roast chicken kind of wine. And that's actually, for me, what Cab Franc goes best with. Is get an herb roasted chicken if you're not feeling it at your Bristol Farms or Whole Foods or whatever. Pop one of these guys and you're halfway there. Maybe a little side salad. And I think that's good. So on to some more. So the next producer is another direct import. And so where Petit Clocher, they were sustainable producers, this La Source is actually certified organic. And they're on limestone. All of the vineyards are on limestone, on tuffeau. And they have very thin topsoils here. So, a lot of the region is marked with a lot of alluvial soils. And we'll get to that as we progress into the next wave here as we go further east. But in Saumur, it is like lots of plateaus with very thin, maybe light, sandy soils, clays, but generally never going more than just a meter down at 3 feet. And usually you're just right into the bedrock, maybe 8 feet in some areas, depending on the slopes and where the things have sort of weathered down. But a lot of this was carved out through glacial activity and the river itself. So most of this on the tops is done by the glacial activity of just carving away the soils. And so you're left with, this really thick bed of limestone underneath. and the vines just struggle to get through. And so in La Source, so he's in this little village, and like those little catacomb tunnels that are all over the place, he lives, kind of in just a nice, like, normal house, and underneath is an ancient, 150-year-old cellar that
Wow.
the village happens to be built over, and he's not the only one in the area who has that. But when you go inside, you really do feel like you're stepping back in time, because in the area where the original reception area, where he uses now as an entrance, there's an area where they carved into the stone an area where they could dump the grapes in, and then they would go into a carved bin carved out of limestone, and they would use just a large wood, like almost like a dowel, and just crush everything as they pushed it around. And then it would run down this carved little area, and all the juice would run free, and then they would collect it and put it into barrels or tanks for fermentation. So he doesn't use any of that anymore, but you can even see in some of the areas where like some of the softer parts of the limestone, there's old Roman coins that have been pushed into the sides of the wall, which is really. I'll send you a picture of it, and you can put it with
I'll put it up for everybody.
Put it up. It's really cool. It's a really cool cellar. So,
and I know Saumur is known for like prettier, lighter style. This is a gorgeous, elegant, just pretty wine. And I'm wondering what happens in Saumur that makes the grape show itself in that sort of lighter, lithe style.
Yeah, I'd say lithe in the sense that I think more of the floral aromatics tend to come in these wines, where in Anjou, I think Cab Franc is always going to have some element of herbaceousness. It's a great variety that's very high in the characteristics that create those flavors. And the warmer they get, the more those back out. But there's also a lot of floral qualities in the wines. And then the old school styles, you'll find a lot of that sort of salty, brackish, black olivey notes like Kalamata and things like that. And that'll show a lot too as the wine's age. But I think what really distinguishes Saumur, and this is actually from Saumur-Champigny, which is a sub-appellation within Saumur. And this is like a more concentrated area where you find, I think, a little bit more detailed and powerful wines. It's one of the more renowned plateaus in the region. And so I think here you're going to find a little more structure, but more, what you said, elegance to the wines, a little more refined character. And then the more powerful they get, and Jean-Noël makes several higher end wines, then they start to see more oak. And probably some of the most expensive and most sought after wines in the Loire for red production actually come from Saumur and Saumur-Champigny. So the most famous is probably Clocher has become a cult producer in the region. And they're Saumur-Champigny, and their wines fetch hundreds of dollars.
What does this fetch?
This is $17.99. So no, $16.99. This is
beautiful.
Only,
yeah,
now,
this is a great everyday drinker. I would drink.
Not the
this.
barrel age on this wine is going to be all used, but mostly tank aged here.
This would be fun with like a mushroomy risotto.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Loire is a lot of the cellars have a lot of humidity, and so you'll see that they grow a lot of steppes, which are the sort of the hill or the cave-grown mushrooms, which were famous in Parisian culture, but they really well in this region, and so they were sort of transplanted here. So you'll actually see in some of these really ancient cellars, they'll have, it almost looks like it looks like black mold, or somebody just put black carpet all over the walls, and it's a moisture capturing effect, but also, it's not like it's damp, but it has this sort of like this almost like very like rosé like texture to it. It's kind of, or like an old shag carpet. But amongst that, they grow the ceps, and so you'll find like some of the best, most sought after mushrooms coming from these regions, from Saumur and nearby Chinon as well.
Well, this would be an awesome pairing.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think that's spot on. Whether it's even just like a mushroom saute, but yeah. Fantastic with this.
And I think that a lot of Loire wines make it to Paris Parisian bistros, right? I mean, it's just such a
They're
close.
approximately one of the, on average, one of the closer regions, and just seems to be more synergy between the two.
Mhm.
So yeah, you do see a lot of bistro style reds that find their way there. Bordeaux is still probably famous, and so you'll see like sort of cheap Bordeaux, like
Yeah.
the basic cafe, some maybe some basic Bourgogne Rouge. But if you're in a Parisian bistro, order something from the Loire. I think you're going to get way more bang for your buck, and the wine's much better with almost anything that you're going to eat, like in any kind of brasserie, or bistro.
Mm. All right, so now we're going. Where are we going? Chinon?
Yeah, so just a little bit further east, so over the two coasts, but now we're at the convergence of two rivers. So the Loire and the Vienne River actually intersect here. So on the west side, when you cross over, you're just a little bit further west of Chinon, you're back in Saumur. But once you cross east and over the Vienne, where the Vienne intersects with the Loire, is Chinon. And so this is a capture of alluvial soils. So soils pushed up from the Vienne and weathered by the Vienne River, and then the weathered soils coming down through the Loire itself. But I would say the Vienne itself has more influence in Chinon because most of the village is, because this Chinon is on the southern side of the Loire, and if you were on the northern side of Chinon, you're actually not in the best growing area. The best growing area faces the Vienne, or is really close to the Vienne side of Chinon. Yeah, most of
it. Is that warmer? More sun?
Yeah, so it's all protected forest there. Yeah, but so if you're in the Vienne and you're in the village of Chinon, you're actually looking at the Vienne River just below you. And most of the soils here, and this is where you're going to find like all the next four wines are really heavily influenced by the alluvial soils. So this is where gravel, you'll find sand, you'll find silt, you'll find clay. And it's all these just sort of pockets pushed up against the various parts of this carved out limestone. So as the limestone has been cut away by these two rivers, and this sort of this little triangle has been, then you end up with lots of these deposits here. And the gravelly soils are terrific for for drainage. So you get these like bright, lustier, kind of very aromatic reds.
Yeah.
Chinon. And so the next wine is the Domaine de la Noblaie. And this is the Temps de Cerises, which is the time of cherries, which I think in the first smell, you're like, yep, there's definitely some very characteristic. This is the brighter red fruited style. Though often I equate like black cherry as a big characteristic you find in a lot of Cab Franc. But here I think you're definitely getting into that red cherry, and a lot of like rose petal and lavender in this wine. So
incensey notes too, and a little pyrazine. It's complex.
Yeah. So Noblaie is primarily they are an certified organic. This is Jerome Billard, not one of our direct imports, but definitely a wine we've been working with for quite a long period of time. I mean, I think I've been drinking the Noblaie wine since I started at KL almost 15 years ago. So I think
one of Clyde's buys, one of his.
What's that?
Is this one that Clyde's been bringing in forever?
No, well, sort of, because of our relationship with the importer, John David Hedrick, who is partnered with Eric Solomon. We've had a long-standing relationship with both of them for so long that before we even had like a significant direct import program in the Loire, we were working with John David Hedrick, who I think is one of the best palates for Loire. He's made some spectacular choices. So, he was first to market, I think, with the Vacheron on the East Coast, and then he brought in Noblaie. He's got some other really spectacular Muscadet producers as well. So if you see a John David Hedrick portfolio label on the back, that's sometimes a good cheat. It's like, if you see that Kermit Lynch label on the back, look for a JD Hedrick. And I would trust in that wine with my life. So, and he's
there you have it.
Yeah.
What is this? What is it? What'll this put you back?
So this just arrived. This is the 2019 vintage, and it's only $17.99. I think, a tremendous, Biard, the producer, the winemaker, is, I think, one of the guys to watch. He's not quite cult status, which is good because his wines can be accessible to people. But I think qualitatively, he has a couple different single vineyards. This is all from the mix of different soils. So some is grown on sandy soils, some is grown on, some of the vines are on a little bit of clay, but not so much these are like heavier soils that don't have as, deeper soils that don't get to the limestone as readily.
Is that unique in Loire with Chinon, where it's got all the compilation of soils coming together at one place?
Well, no, when we look on the north side of the Loire, just across the river is Bourgueil and Saint-Nicolas-de-Bourgueil, which we're going to finish with.
Next, right?
And that's very heavy alluvial soils over the Tuffeau limestone as well. Yeah. And that's actually, I think, where you find a lot of conglomerations of different soils that side of the river, and different pockets everywhere, but it's a bit broader. Here, it's a little bit more jagged. Like there's all these like little corners, there's like a very defined hillside with lots of pockets of buildup and clays and gravels all over the place. And so each one creates sort of a different little microcosm of its own, or microclimate of its own production. You get very, very interesting styles all throughout Chinon. And Chinon is probably the most Cab Franc producing region, so we would, it'd be an error for us not to talk about it. But I think there's a reason why, and that is because of all these different little pockets. You get a breadth of quality fruit that gives you a lot of different tools to work with, and that's what this is. This is sort of a construction of a bunch of different sites that I think is sort of a sum better than its parts kind of wine.
So is that pretty standard that they're blends of different sites instead of single vineyard?
Well, in Chinon, for almost every base wine that any producer in the region makes, yes. So it depends on how much land you have or how much land you have access to. So, when we move to the next wine, we'll taste the single vineyard site that's all on one particular soil type. So, yeah, and that's moving into that.
Let's do it.
Talk about probably one of the most iconic producers in Chinon right now, and that's Bernard Baudry. And this is a Herman Lynch wine. So, yeah, it's something, again, very reputable, easy cheat when you're exploring a wine shelf, if that becomes an option again anytime in the near future. But you can pick up that label and look at that back label and kind of know, oh, this is really, really well vetted. So there's a few producers that I always lean on. If I don't know, that's some things I look for. I look for Kermit Lynch, I look for Paul, and I look for J.D. Hedrick and Eric Solomon to kind of know the style of wine I'm going to get based on, my mood and knowing how these guys pick their wines and the styles that they like. So that's kind of a fun thing. But on to Baudry. So this is the 2017 Clos Guillot. And Clos Guillot is actually on limestone with very, very thin topsoil. So this would be like the apex of production in the region in terms of what you're looking for. Like every producer always kind of favors their limestone vineyards as their most prestigious, like the ones that have the least amount of topsoil, that are close to that Turonian chalk, that Turonian limestone, which is this kind of yellow limestone. And getting into that, it's going to produce the most structured, most powerful wines that often will require some patience in order to get full enjoyment. But I still think even in its youthful stage, most Cab Franc is quite approachable.
Absolutely. This is so classic with the black cherry and the peppery notes and
yeah, and it's got a little bit of that sauvage, like a little characteristic that, and that's very common within Baudry's wines. Usually just enough breadth for us to go, oh yeah, that's a good old school French wine. But there's still so much fresh fruit and spice and lift that I think it marries beautifully together.
Very French.
So definitely not the least expensive wine in the lineup. That one comes in at $34.99, and I think it's it's definitely for Cab Franc collectors. This is the kind of wine you want to put this away for just a few more years and let some of the structure, some of the power behind it kind of marry with that fruit character. And
how long do you think this would age for?
Oh, easily a decade, I think.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to get a little bit further along. The beauty of Cab Franc is it's not a particularly tannic grape variety. It's a high grape variety. And there's a lot of producers that you would think, oh, well, this doesn't have enough structure. It's like, does it have acid? Yes. It's probably going to last. And
yeah,
we're going to prove
that.
It
has both, for sure.
We're going to prove that on the last wine. That it does not take a lot of structure, doesn't take a lot of sweetness or even glycerin. Just that good acidity and clean practices can actually give you a wine that can age for a long period of time and develop some real character.
How do you make a decision about what you're going to put away in your cellar and what you're going to drink right away? I mean, is it something you just based on a producer or something that based on the structure after something you've tasted?
Yeah, I mean, I don't get to taste everything that I buy when it comes to my own personal cellar. So things are projection. So there's a lot of, I do buy a fair amount of Cab Franc because I like to put a few bottles away. I'm not a hardcore, like I'm going to wait 20 years for everything. I'm more of like, a decade is about my patience level before I'm ready to start turning over my wines and like,
still a lot of patience.
Yeah. And, and sometimes maybe I'm even cutting the lifespan of that wine short, but I also think, yeah, how much longer am I going to be here? So I may as well enjoy some of these things.
You've got a few years left.
I'm sure I do. I hope I do. So, but beyond that, I look at most of these wines as like any single one of these wines so far you could discover them in 3 to 5 years and they're all going to be, you're going to be well rewarded. I'd say with Clocher, it might be a little bit softer, maybe not as fresh, but it's still going to be very pleasing. For me, that's the kind of wine that, like you open it, you want to drink that over the next couple of years. I think it's perfect for that. But the Noblaie, for like a well-priced and well-integrated wine, I think that you discover that in 5 years, you're going to be really well rewarded.
What happens to Cab Franc over time? What kind of characteristics come out? I know we're going to get to a little bit of an older one, so do you want to talk about it then?
Yeah, why don't we cover it then?
Okay.
Let's talk. We're going to cross the river, so we're going to leave Chinon. And we're going to go to the alluvial fan that is Bourgueil. And we're going to visit our producer, Domaine Lepin, who we picked up several years ago. And this is a multi-generation family that were primarily growers that were selling most of their fruit to the co-op for years. And then back in the 90s, they decided that they would start producing wine under their own label. They created the Domaine Lepin label. So this is their Les Rochettes. And I think this is maybe one of my favorite workhorse Cab Francs year after year. It's engaging. It has a lot of those similar characteristics you find in Chinon, leaning heavily into the more floral characteristics that you see in Cab Franc and the sort of red fruit qualities to it. And Bourgueil is like, if you think of sort of the San Fernando Valley, it's like a long plain that sort of slopes up. And then all of a sudden you get some mountains. Well, really like foothills in this region. Loire is not a mountainous region. They have some kind of nice hills, but nothing super dramatic. But you kind of get this long alluvial slope. And so most of the alluvium has either come down from these hills as they've been carved away or weathered away by the glacial activity from, hundreds of thousands of years ago, or the river changing course and cutting through and expanding and shrinking over millennia as well. And left a lot of different gravel, sand, silt, and clay deposits all over the region, but it's all piled up on top of that limestone. So I'll send you the video, but there's a video of me in a car driving around in the tunnels underground because the sort of the wild culture of the region. They go into like a little hillside and you drive around and there's like these old cellars. They used to make wine in some of them are just for storage, but they were all carved out, and when they were quarrying away all that rock. So I think it's a fascinating region. And on top of that can be, up to 8 meters in some cases of these gravelly, sandy soils. And so the vines dig deep through all of that.
So are the better sites up on the hill or closer to the river where all this stuff is kind of...
So the further up the hill you go, generally the better, because you're getting closer and closer to that limestone shelf. But sometimes the alluvium is just deeper and deeper and deeper. And so you end up with very, very active vines digging as deeply as possible to get to that limestone and to the water table just beneath it. So
these are known for structure, right? I mean, isn't this sort of supposed to be the bigger, bolder region for Cab Franc?
No, I think Bourgueil is, because it's alluvial, I think you get, and there's a lot of drainage, you get good concentration and structure in the wines, but they always have a perfume and lift to them. They're not generally as olivey or kind of dense as the Chinons. I think a bit more red fruit quality in these wines. But let's move to the next door neighbor, which is appellation of Saint-Nicolas-de-Bourgueil. So if I'm in Bourgueil and I start heading west again, back towards Anjou, I stop in Saint-Nicolas-de-Bourgueil. And literally, Le Pen and Taluau, who's this producer in my right hand, they are about a mile from each other, and they know each other. They're old friends. They're like, oh, yeah, we know them. So the Taluau, we've been working with this producer also for a long period of time. And this is their Vignes bottling. And this is from the 2003 vintage. And 2003, so the soil types are very similar here in Bourgueil. They're basically almost identical, except parts of Saint-Nicolas-de-Bourgueil are a little bit more limestone driven. So they're closer, parts of the appellation are closer to the hills that have more of the limestone. So they don't have to work quite as hard. And it's a little bit smaller as an appellation goes. But so Taluau is fascinating. So Joel Taluau created the estate. He died, I'm going to say in the late 2000s and late aughts. And his daughter and son-in-law took over running the winery. But Joel was famous for making these beautifully structured, high acid wines that age almost indefinitely. And every time I get a chance to go pull some wine from their library, I usually buy several cases and get it shipped over here, and we add it to the set. And so right now we've got the 95, the 96, the 89, which is a stellar vintage, and the 2003. I think we even have some stuff that's a little bit younger, that's not quite as old as those. If you're a little bit shy on getting into the older characteristics of Cab Franc, but I think that the 2003 is a good safe space.
Yes, this is 2003, and so he made this one, right?
So he made this, yeah. And so I think this is where you start to see what a mature Cab Franc can do. Still has fruit, but most of it is secondary. So.
Yeah. And you get more like the chocolate-covered raisin, kind of like the deeper fruit.
Yeah. And then I think here's where you start to see like the forest floor characteristic, the rooms, all of those more tertiary notes, maybe a little bit of burnished leather, some dry, dusty spices, potpourri. These are your dried flowers, sachets of lavender and things like that. But very, very intriguing and complex wines.
Yeah, and it's rich. There's a real weight to the palate still. The fruit is mature. Things are maturing there. There's a lot of complexity, but there's still a lot of gravitas.
Yeah, and 2003 is really interesting. I mean, it's tragic vintage for almost everyone. It was the very, very hot year all throughout Europe, and France was hit hard. It was so bad. The heat was so bad that actually thousands of people died from heat exposure and heat exhaustion, especially in Paris. But it was an extremely complicated vintage to work on in almost every region in France. And so it was a drought summer in the region, so very little rainfall. They also apparently early in the season were hit with frost. So there were anywhere from 60 to 80% crop loss, depending on which part of Loire you were in.
Nice.
in and around what they call the Tours area, which is where Bourgueil is, and so it's very close to the town or the city of Tours. So you get a lot of, I think you still get some warm fruit in this wine, and this is probably
absolutely
outside of every other vintage around it is probably a half to a full degree higher in alcohol. But even these guys, I think, we're still at like 13.5 per points, when most of his wines are probably 12.5 to 13 at the time. So I think
you get a lot of concentration and a lot of complexity, which I'm guessing maybe from that crop loss, concentrated the fruit.
Still see a bit more of the fruit characteristics underneath some of those tertiary notes to it, but it has definitely not receded into the background.
No, it's still definitely fruity.
Yeah.
So how much does this one go for?
So this guy is $34.99, and for a wine that's been perfectly cellared, direct from the winery, I think that's a pretty modest price, all things considered. Yeah. And most of the wines from Taluau that are from the library tend to be anywhere from 35 to 50, depending on the vintage and how much they have left in the library. I think the most expensive wine is the 89, which is kind of an iconic vintage, and they're down to their last few cases. So that would run around $50.
Do we have that in stock?
Yeah, we should have a few bottles left. But I think it's a fascinating wine and really interesting, but it's not my favorite of the lineup. I actually think the 95 is, and the 96 typically, give or take, the bottle itself, those are usually my favorites. I think that 25-year mark is
sweet spot,
about the apex of where these wines go and the quality and character they can offer.
Yeah, what else? I was thinking that these are such great picnic wines. Now that we're doing everything outdoors, I would take any of these, especially in LA when we get these beautiful 70-degree days in February.
Well, don't worry. There might be people back east watching. We don't want to.
Sorry. So that's our lineup. If anybody has any questions, feel free to shoot them our way. Cab Franc, of course, also has a happy home in Bordeaux and in California and many other places. But I agree that this is the spiritual home of Cab Franc. This is where it really gets to shine and be its beautiful self.
Yeah.
So if anybody has questions.
Yeah, and I'd say stylistically, these are, again, if you're more of a Pinot fan, these I think might fit your wheelhouse more in terms of structure and body and character. If you're like, I want big full throttle, Napa cabs or big old school Bordeaux. Well, old school, this would be a fair crossover, I think, as well. But if you want like big kind of modern, luscious Bordeaux, those are much heavier wines than these. These, I think, create a much finer cut. I think they're one of the most ultimate red wines that you can find. Very versatile. They do work well with a lot of even some seafood, especially things like like smoked trout, fairly common. And if you want to get into that kind of flavor profile. But once you start adding things like like a little mayonnaise or some capers, and then you're starting to basically play into Cab Franc's strength.
Cab Franc can handle it all.
Yeah, it can pretty much, it likes foods that are straightforward. I like it with a steak. I like it with a pork chop. I like roast chicken. But it also likes complex foods because it's got a lot of nuance and elegance to it. It doesn't overwhelm the plate.
Oh, wait, I think I see a question down here. Let's see.
Yeah.
How would you say Napa Cab Franc compares to Chinon stylistically, aside from the alcohol levels?
That's a really good question. I think there's really one producer in Napa who's kind of captured the style. But even then, I think, you're going to get a lot more glycerol extract in a lot of the wines of Napa Valley making this style. I'd say if you want to get closer stylistically, you want to go somewhere further south, like Santa Barbara County area.
Although I don't see a lot of Cab Franc in Santa Barbara. Do you?
No, and you have to be careful too, because if you go out east to Happy Canyon, which is a much warmer growing climate, they're going for the more Bordelais style, which are richer, lusher wines.
And Washington State, I know, makes Cab Franc, but also, it's not Seattle. It's over on the other side of the mountain, so it's warm. and oaky.
Yeah, and that's actually, you know, once it's a lot of it is the oak influence, and that's sort of going for more dry extract in the wines. So I'd say, you know, maybe some producers in Walla Walla might have, you know, a bit finer, more elegant style, but they're still going for a more classic Bordelais flavor profile. Like, you know, they sort of model as, you know, they want to be Cheval Blanc, you know, with that sort of Cab Franc character.
Yeah.
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 Right.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere else that grows Cab Franc that?
New Zealand does
really?
Yeah, some really great Cab Franc there. I've had a little bit from Australia, but nothing that's stood out. But I would definitely say, like, New Zealand, we've actually had some very good, kind of a bit more Bordelais in flavor profile, but because of the sort of cooler climate influence, I think you get the brighter, more floral tones in the wines. And I think that's probably the big distinction. You might find a little bit of that because of the grape variety in almost any region. I think should be present. Otherwise, why are you making Cab Franc? But if you don't have some of the floral, kind of like herbal under of the grape variety, but preserving it is sort of the nuance of the Loire does, is basically trying to preserve that freshness, the brightness, and the sort of medium body aspect of the wines.
Absolutely. Well, I'm sorry for my phone issues today, but thank you so much. I think that I don't see any more questions coming up, so I think that that'll do it.
Awesome.
Thank you all for joining us. If you have any questions about Cab Franc, Loire, anything, you can PM me. You can email Keith Mabry at KLWines.com. Just reach out. We'd love to hear what you're interested in too. If you have some burning questions about a certain region, we're down for anything. So send us an email.
Yes, we're here, and we are eager to talk to you now.
Yeah, we miss you. We do. We really do. So this is kind of our way to get, talk to you guys. All right.
Well, thanks for tuning in. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.